Was
Yes,
just about to, yes.
there you go. Okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, it's wonderful to see everyone here tonight. Yeah, my name is Cliff Barbarick, and as Lisa mentioned, I'm the vice president on the board. I'm also part of the Scholars Seminar with the Network of Biblical Storytellers. I convene that group, and that brings me a lot of joy. It's a wonderful group to spend some time with. And then in my day job, I'm a professor of New Testament at Abilene Christian University and also the chair of our Bible department. And so those are some of the things that I spend my time doing, and I consider myself very lucky to have those vocations, right? Those various callings that I get to invest my time and energy in. I'm going to share my screen to bring up a presentation. All right, with some slides just to keep me on track more than anything else. I know myself well enough to know I need some help with that. So the topic for tonight, as I'm assuming everybody saw when you chose and registered for this, is studying Greek when I don't know Greek. And the assumption here that I have is that you all see some value or maybe have a desire to be able to work with some of the biblical languages, even though you have not had the luxury or the opportunity to study those languages in a formal setting. And thankfully, there are some great tools that can give you some opportunities to begin to dabble in exploring the original languages. I'm going to focus on Greek tonight, but both these tools would also be helpful for Hebrew if you wanted to do that. But at least try to equip you some tools that will help you to do so. As I think about what I'm preparing to do, I have some assumptions in mind, right? There's some assumptions I'm bringing with me for this presentation. One of those is that no one in the meeting knows Greek. And I know that assumption is untrue, right? But just as I'm preparing for you what to offer you, that's what I'm assuming. But I am curious, right, to ask how many of you have had some experience studying Greek or other biblical languages? See if I can see a few more of you here. All right, so all right, yeah, some hands. Okay, some hands. So for those of you who already know some of the know Greek, have studied it before, maybe use it. My hope is that this will still be interesting for you, and that maybe you'll learn some new tools, some freely available tools online that will help you leverage the Greek that you already know. But as I'm presenting, I'm going to do my very best not to present in a way that assumes any knowledge of Greek. And so, if feel free to interrupt and ask questions if I say something where I'm unintentionally presenting things in a way that seems to assume you know some of these languages. My plan is not to. I just present it as if none of us know Greek all that well. So that's one of my assumptions. Another is that even though you don't know Greek, that there's something about kind of your approach that you recognize the value of being able to read Greek for understanding the New Testament. My guess is you would not have been attracted to a session like this if you thought there was no value in studying Greek and the recognition of how attention to Greek could help you understand the New Testament better. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time making that case, right? I'm just going to assume we all agree that studying these Greek words will help us read the New Testament better or tell the New Testament better. And then also, I'm going to assume without argument, I'm not going to make this case, or I'm going to assume we all agree that paying close attention to words is going to be something that is valuable in biblical storytelling. And so I'm not going to try to make the case how that close attention will work itself out in biblical storytelling. My assumption is that those of us in the room have tell biblical stories, maybe with some frequency, and so we know how that close attention to words is valuable in that work. And I'm going to assume that you believe that close attention to words could include attending to Greek words, which at the present time, right, you don't read, is my assumption, right? So there's kind of the impasse. There's the place where you might feel stuck. I recognize that this close attention to the words is helpful in biblical storytelling, and I believe that if I could know something about the Greek words, that would also be helpful in my biblical storytelling. And yet, I don't have those tools. I can't read Greek. Well, hopefully, we can introduce you tonight to some tools that will help you be able to give that kind of close attention to the Greek words as you're studying. So those are some broad assumptions that I'm beginning with as we present tonight. Couple things just to provide some framework for how I'm thinking about our studying or our close attention to words. When it comes to words and what they mean, as we've already heard tonight, a word means what it means in context. And I think that Webster's dictionary has maybe led us to misunderstand this point, or at least not kind of operate with a working knowledge of this point. That is, I think we sometimes assume that a word has within it an inherent meaning. And every time a word in English appears, it means this thing. And how do we know that? Because we can go look it up in a dictionary, and there next to the word is this definition. But that's just not how words work, right? Words derive their meaning from the contexts in which we find them. And so a word can shift in meaning, have different kinds of meanings depending on what context we might find that word. And so if we're going to be studying words, and if we're going to be paying close attention to them and thinking about their meaning, we need to pay attention to these various levels of context, right? The kinds of context that we're going to find them in. So here's some different layers of context we might pay attention to. One, a word is going to appear in a sentence, right? Or in even a paragraph. This is kind of our basic closest level of context. And so whatever a word means, it's going to have to make sense in the sentence it's a part of. It has to make sense in that close, immediate context. And so we begin here, and we might broaden out and consider other layers of context. But the end, it always has to come back to whatever I think this word means, it's going to be determined by the sentence or the clause even that it's a part of. But once we've paid some attention to that, we can broaden out and look at other layers. For example, in the New Testament, we might step back and look at how that same word appears within a composition by the same author. So, for example, if we're looking at Matthew's gospel, we might look at a word in a particular sentence, but then we might take a step back and ask, does that word appear anywhere else in Matthew's gospel? And if it does, how Matthew uses that word is going to help us understand how Matthew might be using the word in a specific context. In some cases in the New Testament, we have multiple compositions by the same person. So if you're looking at the Gospel of Luke, for example, you might not want to stop by just looking at the word as it appears in Luke, but you might also want to consider in Acts. How does this word used? And that's going to give you even a broader picture of how Luke, as an author, typically uses that word. And that might help you then come back to the immediate place where you found that word and think about its meaning there. Or, of course, if we're thinking about a Pauline letter, you might compare how a word is used across Paul's letters, and then come back and see how it's used in a specific context. And so that's going to be, other than the immediate context of the sentence it's in, this is really the most important layer of context, because authors use words in certain ways. And so knowing how that author or that storyteller uses a word will be helpful. We can broaden even more though, right? We could say maybe across the New Testament, how are other writers who are committed to following Jesus using this kind of word? And that can also then begin to broaden understanding of what a word might mean and give us some other possibilities for what it means in the particular sentence or paragraph that we're looking at. Then if we want to stress that even more, we could look even across the whole Bible and see within the Bible how is a certain word used. Now, you might recognize already that there's an immediate problem if we're going to be looking across the whole Bible, and that is that the Old Testament is in Hebrew and the New Testament is in Greek. And so that does present some problems if we're going to think how a word is used across the whole Bible. For those, if you're working in the New Testament, however, it does help that there were Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible that were prevalent at the time that the writings in the New Testament were being composed. And this Greek translation of the Old Testament is what we call the Septuagint, sometimes abbreviated as LXX. And so it is possible. Now, this is like advanced word study, and we're not going to get into this much tonight. It is possible that if there's a certain word you're curious about in the New Testament, you can look and see how that Greek word was used in the Old Testament if you have access to the Septuagint. One of the tools I'm going to show you tonight actually does allow you to do some word searches in the Septuagint, and so that's a helpful thing. But again, that's getting into the kind of more advanced word study. The last layer is really the most advanced, where you'd have to have the most knowledge, and that is if we want to know what a word might mean, we're going to have to look even outside of the biblical text just to consider how that word might be used in other writings, in other places, and in inscriptions or wherever else we might find that word in the Greco-Roman context where these compositions came to exist. And the tools there are harder to use, and we're not going to get into how to do that context. For us, I think if we can just see how a word functions across the New Testament, we're going to have made some great steps and really be working toward a deeper, more meaningful understanding of a word. I'm going to make another point here about words and their meanings, but I know I've offered a lot of information very quickly. Does anybody have any questions for clarification at this point? Okay, all right. I'm seeing not seeing any raised hands or anybody unmuting. So we're going to jump ahead to the next point I want to make as we're thinking about words and their meanings. And that is, it's important for us to keep in mind that a word's meaning can grow and shift depending on how that word is being used. And so sometimes, again, maybe because of our Webster's dictionary understanding of word definitions, we might think that a word has a specific kind of precise meaning. Like there is a fine point, this word means this thing. But in fact, if we step back and think about it, we know that that's not true for any word. Right? Any word can be used in different ways and have different meanings, and certainly have a whole range of different connotations. And that range of meanings and that range of connotations can shift over time, right, depending on how a word is being used. So when we're thinking about the meaning of a word, we're not thinking about one precise point. We're thinking about this whole cloud of meanings that's possible for a word. The fancy term, right, that linguists will use to talk about this cloud of meanings and connotations is the semantic range. And so part of what we're going to be doing tonight is thinking through how can we build up our understanding of the semantic range of a word, right? The possibilities of meaning for a word or the different connotations that a word might carry. And if we have that broader understanding, then when we look at the specific occasion of that word and the story we're telling, we can bring some of that depth of learning to bear on what we think that word might mean in our particular context. All right, so that's part of what we're going to be working on is how do we understand, how do we explore that broader semantic range? Now, all of this so far that I've told you is not unique to Greek. This is true for any word in any language. And so one question that we might at least briefly explore is why are English word studies insufficient? Like, why can't I just search for the word and every occurrence of the word in English in my Bible? Like, what advantage is there? What am I gaining by looking for the occurrences of a certain word in Greek in the New Testament? And the simple answer here is that the vocabularies between languages do not match exactly. And I'm expecting that many of you have studied foreign languages, even if it hasn't been Greek. You've studied languages other than your first language. And so you know this, right? That oftentimes when you're first learning in those early stages of language acquisition, someone's telling you this word means this, and they're giving you a kind of one-to-one correspondence between whatever your native language is and whatever is the target language is that you're trying to learn. But the more you learn that language and the closer you get to fluency, the more you realize it's not that simple. There isn't a one-to-one correlation between one word in one language and another word in another language. And that's because the semantic ranges between those two words, or that cloud of possible meanings and connotations, is not going to overlap exactly between two different words. The semantic ranges of a certain word in English are going to be different than the semantic ranges of the semantic range of a particular word in Greek. And that's just how language works. And there's a lot of overlap in that semantic range, and that's why translation is possible. But even though there is a lot of that overlap between languages, they're not exactly the same. And so if we're only doing our search in English, we might be missing some things. Right? And as an example, right, if we were to study, if we were interested in studying the Greek word for word, logos, this is going to be complicated because this particular Greek word is translated in a number of different ways into English. So if you're reading through your New Testament, you might come across any of these words: word, message, reason, story, and any one of these English words is being used to translate the same single Greek word, logos. And so if you were to only be doing a word search in your English Bibles for the word word, thinking you were doing a search of kind of this concept, you'd be missing a whole other host of possibilities as you're making that search. You'd be getting a very limited picture of what the Greek word logos actually means and what it connotes, what its semantic range is. But it goes the other way too. Like, let's imagine you were doing a search for the word love and wanted to see what love might mean across the New Testament. Well, one of the problems here is that the word love in English is used sometimes to translate two different words in Greek, agapao or phileo. Both of these words, different from one another, are both translated in the same way into English as love. And so if you were doing a search for love, you would actually be mashing together two different words in Greek and obscuring maybe those distinctions between them and the different semantic ranges for those two different words. And that would be taken away from the nuance of your understanding of those particular words. And so the basic point here is that if you want to do searches, if you want to do word studies in ways that that give you the most precision and the most nuance, you want, if at all possible, to be looking for every occurrence of the Greek word, right, rather than searching for the English words. That'll keep you from getting false hits, and it'll also keep you from missing places where that Greek word appears. So all this to say, you need some tools, right? And there are tools available even if you don't know how to read Greek. There are tools available to do these kinds of nuanced searches. And that's what I'm planning to show you tonight. It'll be very hands-on. And so what I would encourage you is, if you have the ability on your computer, right, where you can keep the meeting up and follow what we're doing here, but also maybe have another screen where you can switch back and forth, open up some of these resources. And I encourage you to be playing around and exploring with them as I'm showing you how to use them. There's enough steps to what we're going to be going through that it's going to be hard maybe to remember them all. My hope is that it's intuitive enough that just watching us go through it together might be enough that you can hold on to some of these things and continue to use them. But practice is the best way for you to get used to using these tools and to get good at using them. And so, again, what I would encourage you is go and bring up one of these or bring up both of these in a window somewhere in a browser, and then you can be following along and tinkering yourself with these tools as I'm showing you some things on the tools. So I'm going to switch over screens here as we're doing some practicing together of using these two tools, right, and show you some different search tools that you have. The first window I have open here is a very popular, very common tool, different than the ones I've just showed you, called BibleGateway.com. And I'm expecting some of you have some familiarity with Bible Gateway. Do I see some nods or some hands? Do you use Bible Gateway on occasion? It's a very powerful tool, and I love Bible Gateway for a lot of reasons. It's not very good if you want to do word search, sophisticated word searches, but it does some things it does excellently. One, it gives you access to a ton of different translations in a bunch of different languages, right? So you can just click on this menu here and just scroll through, right? A variety. This is all just English translations, right? Or you can open it up and look at other languages outside of English, right? So there's a lot of great translations that you can find here. It's pretty easy to put them side by side. You can find audio Bibles very easily on Bible Gateway. I'm looking for some. Do you guys know where to find the audio Bibles on Bible Gateway? Let me show you this, because this is actually, I think, really helpful for those of us who are in storytelling. I think it's under Study Tools. It's under Scripture Engagement. No, I think I always, there it is, under Read the Bible. If you click on Read the Bible, audio Bibles, it'll take you to a page where you can click through a variety of different audio Bibles, right, in different translations, all right, and some different languages. So when I was trying to learn at one point how to do Philemon in Greek, right, and I was trying to learn a pronunciation system for the ancient Greek that sounded like the modern Greek. And so as part of my practice, I could come here and I could listen to Philemon being read by a native Greek speaker in modern Greek. Right? That was pretty fascinating. But you can also listen to a variety of different translations in English, right? You just click one, right? Click the book, click the chapter, and listen. So a great tool there. But anyway, there's a lot of great things about Bible Gateway. But if you're going to do a word search, it can be kind of limiting. Right? Or all you can do is to do searches in English. So as an example, right, we're gonna do a word search for a minute, in a minute, for the Greek word that is translated as meat. M-E-E-T. Okay? Not a word you might think to study, and yet I think there's some payoff here. I'll show you a context where there's some payoff to looking up what the word meat might mean. But if I was to type that in here in Bible Gateway, right, I'm searching throughout the English Standard Version. If I type that in, it gives me a bunch of results. Right. And one, that's a lot to scroll through. One of the things that you can do is you can come over here and you can search and limit it by the biblical book that you want to look at. But you can see in the New Testament, in the ESV anyway, there are 15 different times that the word meat appears. If I did a search in the NRSV, it might be a little bit different. Or did a search in the NIV, it might be a little bit different because different translation committees might choose to use the word meat to translate different Greek words. So I could look at where this word appears, but really what I'm studying at this point is the ESV translation committee, right? More than I'm studying in particular the use of that Greek word. And you're going to see here that for the particular word I'm interested in, we'd be getting a lot of false hits that would be leading us astray from a more focused study of a particular Greek word. Because what I'm interested in is the place where this word appears in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, right? And I could see that here if I wanted to, right? I could click on it and bring that up. But I'm actually going to also have a lot of other hits that are going to obscure what I'm looking for. So let me show you how I could do this search in a better way in NetBible, where I'm actually searching for the particular Greek word that is behind that sentence in 1 Thessalonians. All right, so a little bit of orientation here. So again, I encourage you to bring up netbible.org. I think the default should be, it'll take you to this page where it'll bring up Matthew chapter 1. The NetBible, the English translation you're seeing over here on this left panel, the NetBible is the New English Translation. That's the name of it. They were very clever when they came up with this translation because initially it was only available on the internet. It was only available digitally. It was going to be a translation that lived in a digital environment. They have since then decided to make some print copies, but it's primarily here in the digital environment. So calling it the NetBible was very, very cute and clever. Right. So this is the NetBible, which is a good English translation. I actually would commit it to you. I think it's a good translation. And so the default screen, you're going to have the English translation over here on the left, and then the default is to have a variety of different notes on the English translation over here in the right panel. Some of these are translation notes, where they're going to tell you, hey, there's different ways that you could translate that word. So that is helpful for starting to think through how some of these Greek words are being used, but it only selectively offers some translation notes. There are text critical notes. So it'll indicate that there are different manuscripts, right, that might have different things, and you can see some of those notes. And then there'll just be content notes where they think that the content might be unclear in the English, and they want to offer some explanatory notes. And so you can see some of each of those over here in the notes section. Again, I think the translation is good. I think the notes are good and helpful. So this is a nice translation in a lot of ways. But it also, this tool also allows you to do some more sophisticated searches in the biblical languages, both Hebrew and Greek. All right, so I mentioned that I'm curious, or I want us to, as an example, look at the word meat that appears in 1 Thessalonians 4. And particularly in 1 Thessalonians 4:17. Right? And this is a passage where Paul is thinking about and trying to offer some clarification for the Thessalonians about what he expects is going to happen when Jesus returns and what's going to happen at that moment. And the impetus for this seems to be that there are people who have died in the Thessalonian community, and the Thessalonians are wondering, like, what's going to happen? Are these people going to miss out on the huge celebration that happens when Jesus comes back? And they're grieving and they're sad because they're worried that some of their brothers and sisters are going to miss out on the event of Jesus' return. And so Paul is writing back, telling them, as you can see here in verse 13, I don't want you to be uninformed, right, about those who are asleep, that is, those who have died, so that you're not going to grieve like other people who have no hope. And he begins to explain to them what he thinks is going to happen, his understanding of what's going to happen at this time. And so verse 16, we can pick up there. He explains, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a shout of command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Right? He's telling them that they're not going to miss out. They're going to be the ones who rise first. Right? So don't worry about that. Right? Then we who are alive, who are left, will suddenly be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be happy, or we'll always be with the Lord, rather. All right, so that there's this, Paul's description here is that everybody's going to be swept up in order to meet God, the Lord in the air. Now, you may or may not know that this passage has been deeply informative for Christians who have developed a rapture theology. Right? That is the idea that there is going to be a time of suffering and tribulation that immediately precedes when Jesus kind of ushers in the age to come, when God's reign comes to earth unopposed. But the faithful will be rescued from that time of tribulation. They will be raptured, taken up off the earth and into heaven before that happens. And that theology, people who purport that theology, will come to this passage sometimes as an example, right? That this is what Paul thinks is going to happen, right? That we who are alive, along with the dead who've been raised, we're going to be caught up together with them in the clouds altogether to meet the Lord in the air. Right there it is, the rapture, right there. They're taken up off the earth to meet the Lord in the air. Except, right, the problem here is Paul does not specify where they're going to go after they meet in the air, right? He kind of leaves the story there. Everybody's met Jesus in the air. Now where are they going to go? Right? Those, like a rapture theology would say, they meet in the air and then they go back up to heaven, right? Leave the earth for whatever kind of suffering or tribulation is going to happen on the earth. But maybe we need to look a little more closely, right, to think about what it is that Paul could mean here. All right, so that's kind of the setup of why I think the word meet is going to be significant here. If I wanted to do a Greek search, right, if I wanted to search for this word in Greek, right, then what I can do is I can come up here and I can click on this tab at the top of the screen that says Greek, okay, and that's going to bring up in the panel next to mine the Greek version, right, of First Thessalonians that the English translation is based on. Okay. And one of the tools you'll see is that if I bring my cursor over any word in English, it's going to highlight that word in yellow, and then it's going to highlight that word in the Greek as well. Let me get some feedback here. I'm not zoomed in very much on my screen because I want you to be able to see as much of the screen as possible, but I also want it to be visible to you. Do I need to make the words bigger? Would that be helpful? Or do you have big enough screens at home that you can see pretty clearly what's happened here? Okay, some thumbs up. We'll leave it for now, right? Feel free to unmute and give me some feedback if you need to see more. Okay, so you can see I can bring my cursor over any word. If that a word appears multiple times on the page, it's going to highlight it each time, both in the English and the Greek. So already this is helpful for being able to see some things. Now, once I bring my cursor over a word, not only will it highlight in yellow where that word appears, both in English and in Greek. But then it also at the bottom, as you can see, of the bottom of that right panel, it's giving me a gloss of the different things that particular Greek word might mean. All right, so if I bring it over Lord, right, we can see every place that word Lord appears, and you can see down there at the bottom several different possibilities for how this word is used, kurios in Greek. Okay. And you can, if you're looking along, you can be just doing this on your own, right? Hover over any word, right? And you can see at the bottom that basic meaning. So we're getting some good information, right? But we can do more, right? We can actually look and see every place that any one of these words appears throughout the entire New Testament. So as I said, the word that I'm curious about is this word meet. Right. And as I hover over this word and look at the bottom, I'm not getting a whole lot of help there. Right. What's my translation option is to meet one. Well, thank you. Right. It's not really expanding my understanding of what that word might mean. But so maybe I want to look and see where else does this word appear in the New Testament and what's that context? And will that help me understand what Paul's imagining in this particular setting? So if I can do this actually with either word, but I think it works better if I bring my cursor over the word in Greek and double click, right? Click twice. It brings up two options. Right? And so I'll show you what each of these options does. Right? The first option, if I click word study, I don't like this. Well, this is fine. It's a fine title for what it does, right? But if you click on word study, it brings up this page where it's going to show me some information, right? There's the word as it appears in Greek. Here's a way to pronounce it, right? So we're getting some information. Here's a basic definition. If you really want to get nerdy, right, This down here under reference, this is pointing you to a set of books called the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. If you have access to a theological library somewhere near you, you probably could go and find the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. It's a multi-volume work, I think 10 volumes all. And what this is telling me is if I go to the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament and I go to volume 1 and I go to page 380, I'm going to find an article about this particular Greek word, right? So again, that's probably more than you want to know, but that's just trying to show you what's available here on this page. For me, that that particular tool is not nearly as useful as the other one, right? Strong search. So again, if I double click on any Greek word over on the left-hand panel, it's going to bring up these two options. If I click on Strong's search, it's going to bring up immediately a list of every place that that word appears in the New Testament. Its default is to do it by relevance, but I don't even know what that means exactly. Like, I'm not sure how one occurrence of the word is more relevant than the other. So I almost always switch it to verse order because I kind of like to know. I like them all to be grouped together by what book they appear in. So I can switch to verse order. And if I really, if I've got one that's appearing a bunch of times, it's not so necessary here. I can click on this button by book and I can kind of scroll through and it'll show me every place that a word appears and how many times it appears in that particular writing. All right, so you can see I'm starting to gather some information. I can start to look through and see what this particular word means. All right, in this case, right, we're going to come back to our 1 Thessalonians 4:17, right, once we've looked at some others. But let's look at where this word appears in Matthew 25, right, and see the story there. Okay, so I can get a sentence here. But that's probably not enough context unless I just know the Bible well enough that I recognize that story right away. That's probably not enough context to see what's going on here. So if I click on it, it actually brings up in the panel, back on the left-hand side, Matthew 25, where this appears, and it highlights for me where the word I'm searching for appears. So you can see the meat is highlighted there in yellow. This can be helpful, especially in places where there might be multiple English words that are used to translate the same Greek word. It'll always highlight that for you because it isn't always obvious where the Greek word appears. Here it is, right? Because it's meat. But you might notice there are other times when the word meat appears, like up here, and it's not highlighted. What that means is that there's a different Greek word there that's being used in verse 1 than the Greek word that's being used in verse 6. All right, but let's look at the context here. Let's see what the story is. This is a story, right, about the 10 virgins who are waiting for the bridegroom, right, to come to the wedding reception. And it says at midnight, right? So they're waiting there. Got to get this in our head. They're waiting for the bridegroom to come. And at midnight, they shout, "Hey, look, there's the bridegroom." So they go out to meet the bridegroom. Right? Now, the question I have for you at this point is, where do they go after they go out to meet the bridegroom? Right? So they're at the wedding reception waiting. They go out and they meet the bridegroom. Do they turn around and go back to where the bridegroom came from? Or are they now going to escort the bridegroom back to the wedding reception? Right? It's the latter, right? That's the practice here, right? You don't want the bridegroom to have to walk in alone. You want an escort. You want a party. You want a parade as the bridegroom comes back to the wedding reception. So you're there at the wedding reception, right? You go out, you meet the bridegroom, and you then come back, kind of escorting the bridegroom back to the wedding reception where you're all going to have the big party. Right? So that's the context in which the word meet is used here. Let's look at another example, right? Acts 28. Right, we can click on that and bring up the story from Acts 28. This is a story about Paul at the end of Acts making his way toward Rome. Right, and as he's making his way toward Rome, we're told in verse 15, right, some brothers from there, when they heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and Three Taverns to meet us. Right, when we saw them, Paul thanked God and took courage. Right, so these people, right, Paul's kind of making his way toward Rome. These people have come to meet them. Where are they going to go? Are they going to now go back the way, right, from where Paul has come from? Or are they coming out to meet Paul to escort him on his journey where he's going from there, right? It's the latter, right? And in fact, if we could keep looking at this word in places where it appears outside the New Testament, we'd find that's a consistent thing, right? This word meet is used in these contexts, like when a king is approaching a city. You go out and you meet the king. and then you escort that king back to your city, right? Making sure they've got a proper welcome into your town or village, just like you go meet the bridegroom and welcome them back into your town and village. Right. So now if we come back to our context here in chapter 4 of First Thessalonians, this maybe now helps us imagine what does Paul have in his head when he says, right, we're going to go up in the clouds to meet Jesus all together. Where are they going to go from there? Are they going to go back to where Jesus came from, back into heaven? Not based on what we've seen so far in the other places this word appears, but maybe what's more in mind is that like you would go out and meet a king and bring him to your town, or like you go out and meet the bridegroom and bring him out to the wedding reception. They're going to meet Jesus and then, right, escort Jesus back to earth where he will reign as king. If that's the image Paul has in mind, then this is not a particularly good passage to support a rapture theology. That's not what Paul is imagining, that people are going to abandon the earth at this point. What's happening is they're going to usher and escort Jesus back to his throne on earth where he will reign in the age to come. All right, so there's some theological payoff, right, to that word that comes from doing some of this word search, and a fairly simple one because it only appears 3 times, right? We don't have to do a lot of searching around, a lot of looking. But I wanted to use that one as an example, just so you could start to see how some of these tools might be used. This would have an impact, I think, on storytelling, though, too. Right? Imagine you're going to be telling this paragraph or this chapter from First Thessalonians. There's a lot of imagery happening here as Paul is imagining and describing what's going to happen at the age to come. And there's a lot of room for you as a storyteller to think about what gestures and what movements you're going to use, right? And if you've thought carefully about what Paul is imagining here with going out to meet the Lord, right, there might be things you do with gestures or things that you do in movement across the stage or movement in space that help your audience imagine maybe what Paul had in mind. That is that you would go out to meet Jesus and then you're going to come back, right? Escort Jesus back somehow to where you are. And so this might be in a case where doing this kind of work could start to have an influence and a shape or influence on your storytelling in some way. All right. Again, that's a lot of information. Let me pause before we jump and look at the other tool and see if that raises questions about how you can use NetBible or what you might be able to use it for. All right, we're gonna get into breakout rooms here in a little bit, and I want you to practice with it, right? So I want you to be ready to dig around and try to experiment some. Let me show you another tool that is in some ways more powerful, but also because it's more powerful, I think it can also be a little bit harder to use, right? This one's pretty simple. If you can pull up the Greek panel and double click on any Greek word, right, you can very quickly bring up every place that word appears in the New Testament. Okay, so very simple, but in some ways also not quite as powerful in what you can do. So let me show you Step Bible, which is another similar tool freely available that allows you to do some analysis of the text. This one is keyed to the ESV, English Standard Version. You can use other English translations, but it tends to work best. Like most of the tools are available if you're working within the English Standard Version. I think the default for some reason is that when you show up, it pops up at James 1. But of course, you can then go from there anywhere else. And again, this, like with NetBible, you could use this for studying both Greek or Hebrew. We're going to be focusing on Greek tonight. So a couple things keep in mind. I tend to close that panel for the time being, and it can pop up when I need it. Just as we're looking at James 1, you can tell if I ever hover over any word with my cursor, automatically at the top of the screen, it brings up some information about that word in the original language. So it's going to give me a definition. It's going to give me the English definition. I'm seeing a transliteration of the word. That is, you take its English letters for a Greek word, but I also can even see what it looks like with the Greek letters up above. And then it offers a brief definition, kind of showing some possibilities for what that word might mean. Anytime you encounter a definition like this, either in Step Bible or in NetBible or in some other Greek English dictionary, for example, anytime you see a definition like this, again, keep in mind, this word in Greek does not have some kind of inherent meaning built into it, right? This word means what it means in context. And so anytime you see a definition, what has happened is people have searched through the Bible and other Greek literature, and just and paid attention to every place that this word appears, that they can find it. And as they've paid attention to those various contexts where they found this word, they've built up some understandings of the possibilities of what it might mean. And so all you're getting there is someone else's attempt to put together the semantic range. Like what is the cloud of possibilities for this word? Well, there you can see a list at the top of what this particular word might mean. You might also notice that it's telling me how many times this word appears in the ESV, and telling me some things about its grammatical identification as well, right? So you can see there's a lot of information just there. Let me, the word I want to look at for this particular example is I'm going to look in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to look at the last verse of chapter 5, because there's a word there that I think it's fruitful, right? If we can do a little bit more searching about what it might mean in Greek. All right, so the very last verse, right, last sentence of Matthew 5, I would argue this is maybe a climactic point in the Sermon on the Mount. In some ways, maybe a summary of the entire instructions in the Sermon on the Mount. But Jesus says at this point in the sermon, "You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." All right, and it's that word "perfect" that I want to take some time to look at in a little bit more detail, because, well, one, it seems pretty important, right? If Jesus is saying we need to be perfect as the Heavenly Father is perfect, I'd like to know what Jesus might mean by that. And not only does it seem important, but it also seems really, really hard. Like, is Jesus asking us to be perfect in the way that we think about that word in English? In a way that, and our perfection is supposed to mirror or imitate God's perfection. Like, we have certain ideas about what it means for God to be perfect, right? That word perfect has a whole set of connotations, right? A whole semantic range in English. And I want to make sure that what I'm thinking when I hear the word perfect is matching up with what Jesus' audience or Matthew's audience might have heard when they heard this in Greek. So if I hover over the word perfect, it's going to pop up some information for me on the top, right? And this is kind of the quick access, right? It's going to show me some ideas about what this word might mean. Perfect, teleos, right? And it's showing me that both in English, the transliteration, and in the Greek letters. And then it's giving me a list of possibilities, right? Perfect, mature, finished, brought to completion, fully accomplished, fully developed, right? And I can double click on this word, and it's going to basically move what was at top over into this panel here on the side. All right, so now I've got all the same information, but it's a lot easier to read after I've double clicked on the word and I can see all that information. So again, I've got here, that's the Greek word, teleos. There's what the word looks like in English, right? If we give it English letters, so you don't have to be able to read Greek letters to get a sense for what this might look like or sound like. It's giving me a sense of the basic meaning, right? As I go through there, I can look at a dictionary entry on this word, which is, I'm guessing, gonna be a lot more maybe than you want to comb through. But if you have some experience with Greek before, you can mine this for information. But it's giving me some examples of what this word might mean with some passages. Anytime I click on one of these passages, it'll bring that up for me so I can see it without having to leave this page and kind of see that word in context. And then what's helpful here is that it'll tell me that this word appears 19 times. And already at the top, you can see it's listing all 19 of those occurrences. It's really tiny. It's really small, right? But it is a way that I can kind of quickly see and scroll through. And if I use my left and right arrows, I can kind of start to scroll through what are those possibilities. So if I just want a quick glance, where else does this word appear? And what is kind of a quick glance at the context? It's giving me a lot of information very quickly, and you can tell that the word is underlined and the color is different, so I can easily see where the word teleos appears in each of these places in the New Testament. All right, so I can kind of comb through and see a lot of information there, but if I want to be able to look at it more closely, if I just click on this 19 times, it's going to bring over in this left panel a list, right, of every place that word appears. Now it's a little bit bigger. It's still highlighted, which is helpful, but I can see some of the different places where this word appears and some of the different meanings that it might take. The default is that it's going to show me all these things in English translation in the ESV. If I want to, I can click over here on ESV and it brings up other translations. And one of the things I like about the Step Bible that's not possible to do in NetBible is I can actually stack on top of each other different translations so I can see them next to each other. And so I could click, if I'm curious what the NIV does with some of these words, I could click on the NIV and it would show that. So let me, as an example, we'll click on NIV, but I also can bring up other translations, right? I could bring up the ancient translation. So in Greek, I could bring up the SBL Greek New Testament, and that would show me what the Greek line would look like. As a reference point, you're going to notice there's a lot of different Greek books there that are offered, translations that are offered there. The SBLG or the Greek New Testament from the SBLG and T is your best bet here on Step Bible. Okay, some of these other Greek New Testaments are much older and are not as up to date with the most recent manuscripts that have been found. So you want to choose the SBLG or SBLG&T as the Greek that you're going to look at if you want to look at that as you're looking at things. So again, I can click some different translations here, click OK, right, and now it's going to stack all those on top of each other. So you can see in the ESV is my top line. Then I can compare to what that looks like in the NIV and see how a different translation committee handled some of those words. And then I can also see, if I'm curious, right, what the Greek sentence looks like, right? And I can scroll through and look at each of the examples and study each of those examples as I'm starting to build up, right, my understanding of the semantic domain, the semantic range for this particular word. And so there's a lot to work with there. This is a much more complex example than our other one, right? There's a lot more hits, and so it'd take a lot more time for us to go through and look at all of the possibilities for what this word might mean. But right, you could see how you would start to do that same thing. One other thing I like about the Step Bible is if I want to, I can add to my search some other similar words. So right now I'm only searching this particular word, which is a noun form, right? Actually, probably adjective form of this word, but I can look up other forms, right? And you can tell they're related in different ways. I can look up verb forms like to be perfect, for example. I could click on that, and now it's going to add every occurrence of that related word to my list of words that I'm looking at. So you have some maybe perfection is another similar one, right? So I can click on those related words, and now I've got a longer list with some other words that might help me kind of more fully round out the possibilities of what this word might mean. Just in order to kind of summarize some things and make sure you've got some time to experiment and play around with these tools yourselves. If you look through this list, right, and see the different uses of this word, you're going to notice that something like complete or whole or mature are also common understandings and translations of the word teleos. And in English, that works. Like we can use the word perfect, and for us, it can have the connotation of whole or complete or mature. That's probably not the default place our minds go, right? When we hear perfect, we think of maybe something else besides wholeness as a first step. Even if in English, right, the word perfect does have that possibility, that's not kind of the default place our minds are going to go. But in Greek, we see that's a much more common understanding of this word, something like mature or whole or complete. And so then when I come back to Matthew 5:48, I'm looking at this, right? I might still use the word perfect, right? I might check and see. There might be other English translations that translate it in different ways. I know, for example, the CEB translates it as complete, right, rather than perfect. But you've got a sense, even if you continue to use the word perfect as you tell this passage to somebody, right? If you're thinking about the idea of wholeness or of completeness, then that might shape, right, the gestures that you're going to use, right? Therefore, you must be perfect, right? Maybe kind of an idea of whole, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. And I think in context, that idea of wholeness it makes the most sense to me. In Matthew, this part of Matthew 5, right? The build up to this particular line from Jesus is a description of God's love that extends both to the righteous and the unrighteous, both to the evil and the good. He makes his sun rise, Jesus says, on the evil and the good. He sends his rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous. So what's being described about God in this section of the Sermon on the Mount is a kind of wholeness to God's love. God's love is whole and complete in that it extends to everyone, right? And in that way, it's perfect. So when Jesus then tells his audience, you need to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, the kind of perfection he's just described is a kind of wholeness to God's love that extends both to the evil and to the good, to the unrighteous and to the righteous, to enemies and to neighbors. Right. And so if God is whole, if he's perfect in loving in that way, then that gives me a better idea. Like, what is Jesus asking? What is he telling me when he tells me or us, right, that we must be perfect as the Heavenly Father is perfect? Right? So again, there's some insights from a word study, right, very quickly offered, and maybe some reflections on how that would shape storytelling if I was actually going to be performing this passage for an audience. Before I give you some instructions and send you into breakout rooms to work on this on your own, any questions or clarifications for how to use Step Bible? Are you feeling properly overwhelmed? That's what, yeah, you should, right? That's a lot, right? I mean, you got to spend some time digging around and playing around, I think, before you won't break it. Don't worry. You can't break it. You just, if you get just, refresh the page and start over, right? Just go back to netbible.org and begin again from the beginning. All right. So what I want to do now is I want us to break into some breakout rooms, and Dale's going to help with this. And you're going to be in small groups, maybe 3 to 4 people. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like each person in the group to choose a word that you would like to study that comes from a story that you're learning, or maybe that you're preparing to tell. And so, and if you don't have something in the hopper right now, maybe it's one you've told recently or one you kind of would like to look at. But choose a story or a passage and find a word in that passage you'd like to study. And then what I'd like each of you to do is on your own, while you're in a breakout room where you can see each other, kind of work through doing a study of that word in one of these 2 tools, either NetBible or Step Bible. So go to one of those tools, find your passage, see if you can figure out what the Greek word is that's behind the English word you want to study. All right, that's one thing. Can you identify the Greek word? Then using one of these tools, could you find every occurrence of that Greek word in the New Testament? Right? Could you do that? Right. Then if you make it that far, kind of scan through and see just as a quick glance, am I starting to see some possibilities for what this word might mean? And then as a last step, of course, you want to bring that back and ask, okay, how might that shape what I think the word means in the story where I started? How might that shape what I would do as a storyteller working with this particular word in this particular story? And the reason you're in breakout rooms is so that when you hit a hurdle, right? I'm assuming you're going to be working on it and you're like, I forgot the next step, or I'm having troubles, right? When you hit a hurdle, you're not alone, right? There's other people in the breakout room and you can say, hey, can anybody remember how to do this? And then I will kind of pop around and visit and see if I can help with anything as you're in the breakout rooms. And so we're going to spend some time, a good bit of time working on this together in the breakout rooms. And then we'll come back and for the last 10 minutes or so, just open it up to any insights that you gained from your time playing with one of these tools and searching for a word. Okay. All right. Do you have questions about what I want you to do in the breakout rooms? Claudia, I see you have a question. Yeah. But you're still muted.
In the breakout rooms, these tools are going to be available to us, or should we have how to
yeah,
have
you'll
another
have to
screen
open
going?
them up on a web browser somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want would it
And
help? Do you want me to
how
send
long do you
you?
want? How long do you want us to spend in the breakout rooms?
It'll be about 20 minutes.
Okay.
And would it help? I'm trying to think if I can have it. Have you been able to find the Net Bible and the Step Bible? I could put the links in the chat, but my guess
I
is
did.
okay.
They are
Thank
in
you,
the
Dale. All right,
chat.
Dale's already ahead of me on that. I've been trying to keep up with that. Perfect. All right. Well, yes, you'll need to open them on a separate web browser, right? And that way you can have that open and be digging around and exploring something. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. No one's unmuting, so I'm assuming we're ready to go. I'll like I said, I'll kind of pop around and visit different breakout rooms, and that way I can also step in and help if you're hitting some hurdles and offer some suggestions about what you might do. Sound good? All right, Dale, go ahead and break us into our groups and enjoy playing with these tools.
Okay. Give me a second.
All right, so might have got an invitation to join a room.
We only have two more, so 4 persons per room is okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, well, and looks in room 2, I got first put in room 2, so there's only 2 people in there right now. You might add somebody to room 2. looks
Oh,
like.
sorry.
No, that's okay. I just noticed that as I was looking at where folks are. But yeah, 4 people's fine. Good. All right, looks like people made their way. Thank you, Dale.
Hey, you're welcome.
All right, I'm gonna go get some water and then I'll start visiting the breakout rooms.
Very good. Yeah, we lost about 5.
Yeah, I was noticing that. I was, with the screen up, I have as I'm showing things on my screen, I can't really see the whole room as well. So,
We had 17 and
okay.
we're down to 11.
Yeah, I ran a few off, right?
Well, I think they learned what they thought they needed to
Yeah.
learn. And
Well, yeah, some people that get in the breakout room that, okay, that's enough. They don't want, that's too vulnerable or too much being asked of them there.
I've been playing with my tablet on the side here under Step Bible, going, "Ooh, I can do stuff with this."
It's powerful. I didn't even show you. I didn't show. You can search the Septuagint as well
Oh, no
in Step
kidding.
Bible, which that's the first tool I know of that's freely available online that you can do some searches in the Septuagint. So yeah, that's a really nice addition.
Yeah, and I'm imagining one of the first places I'm going to go to later is FAQ.
Yeah, there's lots of, and they have some helpful tutorial videos, both on Step Bible or if you went to YouTube and did a search for tutorials, there's probably folks showing you how to do all sorts of tricks with
Sure.
that tool. Yeah. All right.
Well, I'll let you about your stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, I bounced around to the different groups that looked like they were all figuring stuff out, at least beginning to.
Good. I don't know if they saw the broadcast I was giving. 1 minute.
Yeah, I think they did. In the group I was in, they noted it. They saw it. Yeah. And I'm just gonna have a quick wrap up, so we won't need a lot of time. We'll see if anybody has any questions, but I'll just say a last word and close this out.
Okay, I'm closing
Okay,
27 seconds.
sounds good. Count them down.
Because if they look across the bottom of the screen, they can come back anytime.
Yeah, you can leave the room anytime you want, right?
Yeah.
All right, I think we've got everybody back. It looks like this is the faithful remnant. We started with more. Right? Our faithful remnant has remained, and hopefully, you have received a reward for your faithfulness by sticking through the whole session. But as I went through the different breakout rooms, it looked like you guys were figuring out how to use the tools, and we're finding some interesting things to explore. And that's my hope, right? You're just at the beginnings. There's a lot more that you could learn by studying. And playing around with these tools. There probably are some tutorial videos. I haven't, combed YouTube for all the possibilities, but you probably could find some tutorials if you're wanting some ideas about other ways you might use these tools and kind of really leverage the power they have. I mentioned to Dale, I didn't show you, but in the Step Bible, if you want to, there's ways also to extend your search back into the Septuagint if you're looking at Greek words, which is one of the, there's, as far as I know, there's not another freely available tool online that allows you to do Greek language studies like that into the Septuagint. So yeah, leave that for another day because things get more complex as you do that. But anyway, it's a very powerful tool. My advice for you would be the same advice that I believe Spider-Man received from Peter Parker from his uncle, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Okay, so you now have some pretty powerful tools in your hands, right? So use them well and carefully and responsibly. Right. There's a book that I'll sometimes read with my students in class. It's called A Little Exercise for Young Theologians by a German teacher, like a older German. He's no longer alive, Helmut Thielicke. And his basic message in this short little book, and this is why I read it with students, is like, don't go back to your churches and beat people over the heads with what you've learned. Right? No one likes that. They're not going to like you. And then they're not going to like higher education because of that. That's like his message to them. So sometimes I have to tell my students that, like, don't go back to your churches and show off, right? Because people aren't going to like it. Then they're not going to like you. And then they're not going to like that they sent their kid off to college and he came back like that. So, use your knowledge for good, right? And use it to encourage and build up, right? And I'm saying probably to you what I don't need to say to you. But just know, right, you have a lot of information, a lot of power, and use that carefully, use that well to love and support the communities that you're working with, to improve your storytelling, right, and enjoy that knowledge as you're gaining it. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Again, I hope that this was helpful for you, and I hope you've got a new tool that you can enjoy and experiment with as you learn and tell biblical stories.
What's the title of the book again?
Oh, it's a little exercise for young theologians. A little exercise for theologians. It's I mean, it's like 60 pages or something. It's very short, but it's delightful. It's a fun read. And I have to read it for myself too, by the way. Like, it's good for me to read with my students to remind myself. Yes, don't
Thank you so
don't
much.
don't abuse people with knowledge, right? We can use knowledge as a powerful tool to abuse people, or we can use it to love people, right? So
And thank you so much for these tools that, yes, I'm a nerd, but not every one of my parishioners is.
yeah, that's another key. Now, others might not care about it as much as you do. That's another thing to keep in mind. That's right. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you
God
Next
bless.
time we can connect.
so much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.